Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation. Date is June 25th, 1997. Survivor is Milka Nakar, born Pfeiffer. Interviewer is Dina Cohen. The city is Rockville, Maryland, USA. The language is English. My name is Dina Cohen. Today is June 25th, 1997. I will be conducting an interview with Milka Nakar, born Pfeiffer, in Rockville, Maryland, USA. The interview will be in English. Could you please state your full name and spell it?
My name is Milka Nakar. First name is spelled M-I-L-K-A. Last name Nakar is spelled N-A-K-A-R.
And what was your name at birth?
My last name was Pfeiffer. First name was the same as now. And Pfeiffer is spelled P-F-E-I-F-E-R.
And were you known by any other names?
Yes, I was married prior to my marriage to Mr. Nakar, and my name was May, M-A-Y.
And when were you born?
I was born on the 28th of August, 1926.
And the city and country of your birth?
In Subotica, Yugoslavia.
Could you spell that too?
Shall I spell that? Okay. Subotica is S-U-B-O-T-I-C-A. Yugoslavia is Y-U-G-O-S-L-A-V-I-A.
And how old are you now?
I will be 71 in August.
And could you describe your family in Yugoslavia when you were growing up?
Yes. I was the seventh child of a large middle income or middle class religious family. Our parents had 8 children. I was the 7th, as I stated. And we had a business of manufacturing meat products, sausages, canned meat products, and also exporting poultry to places like Germany and Switzerland, where the religious shita was not allowed, religious slaughtering was not allowed. And at the point of, at the start of the persecutions, we were 4 at home. The oldest sister was married and she had 4 small children. My oldest brother was in the Hungarian army and he was sent to the Eastern Front in Russia to do digging trenches and so on. And the other brother was in the Yugoslavian army until 1941, and he was taken prisoner of war by the Germans. We had contact with him. We knew that the Jewish prisoners of war were separated from the others, but we knew that he was relatively safe and in good condition.
Could we just go back a little?
Yes.
About your early childhood. Could you
Yes.
tell me a little more about your parents, their names, what they were like?
Yes. My father's name was Simon, and he was being referred to as the smart or the intelligent Jew, and also the non-Jews who had contact with him usually referred to him as the honest Jew, because, as I mentioned, he bought poultry, and in the rush season, the farmers would send their children with the poultry and not bother to come themselves because they didn't have the time for that, but they knew that they would never be cheated out of a single penny. My father was very well learned, especially in the Judaic subjects, and was a figure who automatically elicited a lot of respect. We always looked up to him, especially since I was the seventh. I was the second youngest. One sister was engaged to be married. Her name was Dvora or Deborah. She is one of the 3 siblings who perished in a span of 2 weeks by the end of the war. My younger sister was Gabriela, and we were almost like twins. We were very close, and she also perished on the way from Theresienstadt.
Could you tell me about your mother?
My mother was a housewife. She worked in the store, and my parents were very devoted. I remember when my mother became ill toward the end of her life, my father was very anxious to go visit her, and he hitched a ride on a motorcycle to get there sooner, and I thought that was so remarkable. And they were very, very devoted to each other.
And your mother's name?
My mother's name was Eva, or Hava in Hebrew.
You mentioned that your family was religious. What
Yes.
kind of observances were in your home when you were growing up?
I'd say we were Orthodox. Of course, strict observance of the rules of kashrut. And my father went to the synagogue twice a day. He was also what is called a Talmid Chacham. He was very well versed in the Judaic literature. Later on, toward the end of his life, when he could barely see, he was able to repeat and even correct people at the Torah reading because he had such a phenomenal memory. And we were what you call a middle-class family, not rich, but we were comfortable. And my mother, it was very important for her to charity. And I remember when I was a child, she would send us children to poor families to bring certain types of food.
Could you describe a typical Sabbath in your home?
Yes, a typical Sabbath made me fantasize that I am a princess and the father is a king, because the house was so lit up and everything so festive and joyful.
What kind of religious education did you have as a child?
Actually none, other than what I got at home, because I attended a public school. And there weren't any religious schools or religious Sunday schools in our town.
Could you describe the public school that you attended, please?
I would think it is quite an ordinary one. It was called Krajina Maria. That is the Queen Maria. It was named after Queen Maria. And I don't have very much of a recollection from school, other than in 1941 we were supposed to write a free essay, and I wrote something about the injustice of numerus clausus, because we were not allowed to continue in school. And I wrote that the letters of numerus clausus reminded me of snakes encircling us. And the teachers were impressed, but I was told to please take it back and write something neutral.
What were your classmates like?
I don't have much of a recollection of the classmates other than two neighbor girls. We were the same ages and we were very close, playing together, but again, I don't have much of a recollection.
Were those girls Jewish?
No, no.
What were relationships like in Subotica between Jews and non-Jews?
There were no problems whatsoever. At school, I remember one classmate saying that she heard at home that Jews use Gentile children's blood for making the Passover matzah. And of course I was abhorred by this, and I asked the teacher to speak to that classmate about this. Other than that, we were really not aware of any anti-Semitism, and there were very few Jews in Yugoslavia, relatively. May I take some water?
Go right ahead. What were your ambitions as a child? Was there anything that you wanted to be?
Matter of fact, I remember myself when I was about age 6 that I told my parents that I wanted to be a physician. And since we had a business of manufacturing meat products, I used to observe a poultry being cut open, and I would try to imagine what the internal organs would look like in humans, and what function those internal organs would have. So it was sort of an unusual activity and an unusual way of thinking for a young child.
What did your parents think of your ambitions?
Of course, it was completely out of question, because according to my parents' way of thinking, academic profession was completely out of question for a religious Jewish girl. She should only strive to get married and have a good, large family, and that was it.
What did you do for fun as a young child?
Oh, play hopscotch, everything that children do.
Was there anything in particular that you enjoyed the most?
Reading. I was a bookworm, and I was in the habit of reading past the lights out hour, so there were several sheets with a hole burnt in them because I slipped under the sheet and had a reading lamp there.
Did you belong to any organizations as a young girl?
Yes, I was part of a group which met. We had a club, and it was the Hashomer Hatzair. It was a Zionist organization.
What kinds of things did you do in that organization?
Mainly debating, mainly discussions. I don't remember any outings or anything of the sort.
What awareness did you have of the Nazi rise to power in Germany in the 30s?
At the time of the Nazi takeover of Austria, we knew about the mistreatment of Jews in Austria, and and we were very much distressed by that. However, we actually were completely kept in the dark about what was happening to Jews who were deported from their homes. And at one time we received a postcard that was sent through the Red Cross. It was only signed, and it was a form, routine form that said we are working and we are safe and we are having a good time. And the postmark was from some kind of a vacation place to mislead people.
And who was that from?
That was from a cousin who was previously deported to Auschwitz and from there sent to a camp, a work camp, but I found out all this only after the war.
Did your family ever think about leaving Europe? Do you know?
Yes, we actively considered that, and we had a family council and considered escaping to the south, to the part of Yugoslavia that was actually taken over by the Germans, but we knew that there was resistance, and actually we did not know details about what was happening. But we had a sister who was very severely handicapped, and we would not have been able to take the escape route with her.
We didn't really, you talked a little about your siblings. Could you just name them and describe them a little bit?
The firstborn was Leopold, and he was married at the time of the persecutions. His education was in a yeshiva, and he studied in Frankfurt am Main in Germany. The next was a sister, Nushi or Nechama. She was married and she had 4 little children. The next in line was Yitzhak, and he's the one who was a prisoner of war in Germany. His education was also in a yeshiva. He learned in Nitra in Czechoslovakia. Then the next in line was the sister. Her name was, the sister who was very severely handicapped. Her name was Bracha. And the next in line was Dora, or Deborah, and she was engaged to be married. She was very beautiful and very well-groomed always. And the next in line was Esther. And my mother's sister and her husband did not have any children. They asked our parents, would they let them have one of us to raise them? And the parents agreed, and they let Esther. They said it would be Esther. And we were living in Yugoslavia, and this aunt and uncle were living in Hungary. So Esther came home only in school vacation. And we envied her tremendously because we thought she was having a marvelous life. She's being spoiled. And Esther felt very bitter. She felt that she was being abandoned by the parents. But she did indeed get a good education, also art education. She is an art teacher. And she's teaching ceramics in the kibbutz to children and also to adults. And then the next in line, myself. And I had only 8th grade education. In 1941, I was in the 8th grade, and that is when we were not allowed to continue in school. And after with the anti-Jewish laws, our freedom, our right to earn a living were all eroded gradually, and we were not allowed to employ any non-Jewish workers. So we, the sisters, were working in the family business, also in the manufacture of the sausages, food products, and so on, and the meat products, canned meat, and so on.
You left out your youngest sister.
Yes. And my youngest sister was 2 years younger than myself, and she was in grade school. And she was also very beautiful, and we were very close. We were just like twins. We were always together. Her name was Gabriella. I didn't mention that.
What do you recall about the outbreak of the war in '39 when Germany invaded Poland?
I recall that there was shooting, and then one night there was a terrible silence. All of a sudden, all the shooting stopped, and the silence was almost unbearable. And that is when the Hungarians marched in. And at the outbreak, there wasn't really much resistance to the Hungarian, but only some youngsters threw hand grenades, mainly Jewish youngsters, and they were arrested, tried, and executed.
Did you witness any of that?
No, I did not, but I knew the ones who were involved.
How did you know them?
From school, from clubs.
And when did the Hungarians come into Subotica?
In spring of 1941. I believe it was March 1941.
And how did your life change after the Hungarians came in?
Well, the anti-Jewish laws were enacted very gradually. So actually, between 1941 and spring of 1944, we were relatively safe and relatively comfortable. And in 1944,
well, let's
okay.
talk about life under the Hungarians for a while. Did you say that you could no longer go to school?
That's correct. And then we were just working in the family business, as I stated, in the store and in the manufacturing.
What kind of restrictions were imposed on you, if any?
Not then. That came later on.
And what about religious observances?
As I recall, religious observance was not curtailed, was not prescribed.
Did you have any contact with Hungarian soldiers or any occupying forces in that period?
No, I can't recall any contact.
So, could you describe a typical day?
Typical day would be spent around the house or in the business or in the manufacturing process, helping my parents. And then I would be playing with my sister and the playmates across the street. And as I mentioned, I was a bookworm, so I would be reading at every opportunity. I also surprised my teachers at age 8, I started writing poems. And it sort of runs in our family.
In that period, 41 through 44, were you aware of what was going on in the rest of Europe, especially in Poland?
We were not aware at all. No news reached us. And after the war, I heard that in 1942 it was already known, but it was not comprehended by the free world. And of course, it was beyond comprehension.
You mentioned that one of your brothers had been taken to work by the Hungarians.
Yes, he was in the Hungarian army, and then they were put into what was called work camp. And they were sent to the Russian front to dig trenches. And we lost contact with him. After the war, I found out that he was in Mauthausen, which was one of the worst camps, and he died in Mauthausen. In a span of 2 weeks, when the war ended, all 3 of my siblings perished.
Under the Hungarian occupation, was there any change in the relationship between the Jews and non-Jews of Subotica?
Yes, there was, because the former employees were encouraged to put in claims for overwork or claims for additional hours that they were not paid for, and things of the sort. And then eventually we also had to sell our house. We were forced to sell our house and the business.
And when did that happen?
I don't remember the exact date, but as I said, the anti-Jewish measures were enacted gradually, and then they became very bad in 1944.
What did you do after you had to sell the house and the business?
I believe that was around the time when we had to move into the ghetto in Subotica. So it must have been.
Go ahead.
So it must have been in 44.
We'll continue on the next day. '25th, 1997, interview with Milka Nakar, tape number 2. You were talking about your family having to sell the home and the business in 1944. What happened that caused that?
After that, we had to move into the ghetto in our hometown. And we were not too long at the ghetto, but while we were there, we had to work. We were housed in a sawmill. There were approximately 3,500 people, and we had to wear the yellow tag, yellow armband rather, and were not allowed to leave the premises after 8. We were given rations, food coupons for the work, and the rations were not very substantial.
Who guarded you in that sawmill?
Hungarian soldiers.
Were there German soldiers there?
No, not that I'm aware of.
But what happened in 44 that caused the Hungarians to establish the ghetto? Do you know?
Yes, the lawful government of Hungary Horthy was overthrown by the pro-Nazi party, which were a fascist party. They were called the Arrow Cross Party. And then they started the persecution of the Jews in a real brutal way.
And could you describe the ghetto a little bit?
It was, as I said, a sawmill, so there wasn't anything of creature comfort, just bunk beds and nothing beyond that. I don't have much of a recollection of it. But I do remember when we were told that the next day we should be ready with only a backpack or a suitcase. And around 5 o'clock in the morning, the ghetto was surrounded, and we were told everybody had to get out. And we saw the Gentile neighbors around just eagerly waiting to get hold of the possessions that were left over by us. And this is how the Germans got the cooperation of the Gentiles, that they let them take over the property or the businesses or the actual belongings of the Jews. So at that time, the pro-German Hungarians were concentrating the Jews from outlying areas, like from villages or smaller towns, into larger ghettos. And at the time when we were told that we had to get out, we were sent to a place which was called Bács Almás. It was a transit camp, wasn't very far from Subotica, from our hometown. And we were there approximately less than 2 weeks.
How did you travel there? How were you taken there?
We were loaded into cattle cars, about 70, 80 people to a car. And because Bács Almás wasn't too far from our hometown, this wasn't too terrible at the time. And at Bács Almás,
yes, could you describe that camp?
Bács Almás, again, those were just very utilitarian huts, but all the severely ill, handicapped people were put into one hut on an earthen floor without any care at all. And then I organized a group of 5, my sisters and cousins, and we started caring for them. We went around looking for straw and blankets and brought them water. And I was working there helping the doctor, who came in also out of his own volition, taking care of the people, and I was sort of assisting him.
Was the doctor a prisoner, or was he?
Yes, he was Jewish. Yes.
And how long were you in that camp?
Approximately a week. And then we were told that everyone was to come to the railroad siding, and we were supposed to embark into cattle cars again. We happened to be among the last, and this was quite fateful because of what happened later. I will tell you about it, but there were 2 important reasons why we were among the last. One, that while we were standing out there, it was announced that the Klein family, my oldest sister, married name was Klein. It was announced that the Klein family have received a protective pass from the Swiss consulate. And that meant the whole family. In other words, the daughters-in-law and the married daughters and the grandchildren. And my sister was debating with herself whether to go with her in-laws or to stay with us. in the end, she decided that she would stay with us. The other reason was that we were taking care, I and my group were taking care of the invalids, and this was another reason that we were among the last to embark.
What happened to the handicapped people that you had been taking care of? Where were they?
They were put into a separate wagon, separate train, and after the war, we knew that they were gassed outright.
Was your handicapped sister among them?
Yes, she was.
So, and your sister's husband, Klein, where was he?
The sister's husband's family?
And her husband himself did?
No, the husband was in the Hungarian army, and he was also in this forced labor battalion. And he was also on the Russian front digging trenches and so on. He survived, and they were reunited after the war.
So you said that you were among the last to be
to embark
in
the cattle car, yes.
And could you describe the journey in those cattle cars? Did you know where you were going?
No, we did not. We were locked in for 10 days and nights, and we were standing on sidings more than we were moving, and this was in the middle of summer. It was, I believe, July, and we didn't know where we were going, where we were headed. They gave us some water occasionally. Other than that, we didn't get any food. We were not allowed to get out for bodily needs. We designated one corner of the wagon as a toilet area, and there were 2 buckets, and we put a blanket in front of it. And some people became ill, and some became insane, and some died. And then one night, we heard some unusual activity under the car, and right outside the car that we were in. And a railroad worker said, "You people, you are lucky. You just don't know how lucky you are. God loves you." And he didn't elaborate. And then we felt that the car was being uncoupled, and we started moving in the opposite direction at a rather greater speed than we were traveling up to then. And then we arrived at a transit camp, which was called Strasshof, which is in Austria. And we were also not very long in Strasshof again, for about a week, more or less. And from there we were sent in groups of several families. Our group, happened to end up in a place which is in present-day Moravia. The place is called Porlic, or Pohorzelice in Czech. And there we were doing, working in crops, bringing in the crops. And we had supervisor, not German soldiers, but just somebody from the people who owned the field or something, somebody in civilian. And this was not too terrible, because we could pull up some carrots and eat it, or eat some tomatoes right off the vine when the supervisor wasn't looking. And there were some Czech people around who tried to help. There was one man, his first name, we only knew his first name, it was Vilo. And he said that he would like to help, but he can't bring enough food for everybody. So he singled out my older sister, Dora, and told her that he would whistle a certain tune every morning on his way to work, and he would throw the part of his lunch across the wall of the compound, because we were in an enclosed compound. And he told us that his wife was pro-Nazi, so he had to keep this a secret even from his wife. And he was endangering himself because anyone who helped Jews would suffer the same fate as they did. And then we were in Porlitz from approximately from June or July till end of November. And in November...
Could you just tell me who was with you? In your group, you said...
In our family, it was my mother, my father, two sisters, and the older sister, the one who had the 4 little children. So it's 3 sisters. And there were also 2 cousins and my sister-in-law, my oldest brother's wife.
And could you just, before you continue, could you tell me a little more about Porlitz, the living conditions, and...
It's a small community. We were in an enclosed compound and were not allowed to leave it. So I don't know anything about the
compound
about the
itself.
people at the community. The compound, again, it was very utilitarian, just bunk bed, and I believe we had some very primitive cooking facilities also.
And how long were you there?
We were there from July till end of November 1944.
And what happened in November of 44?
We were sent to the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen at that time. And Willow found out that we are going to be sent to the concentration camp. And because he was afraid of his wife, he had to do this in secret. His intention was to help us to bring some food. So he went hunting, and he bagged some rabbits. At home he also slaughtered a pig, which he apparently did every year for his family. And then he took some of the meat to an old Czech woman whom he trusted, and he asked her to prepare some of the food and to bake some baked goods for us, and he brought those. And then my father, who, as I mentioned before, was a religious man, told my mother that it was all right for us to eat the meat, but she should soak it and salt it before, which is the religious procedure for getting the blood out of the meat. And she said that he would not eat any of that himself, but he took the pelt, the pelt of the rabbits, and he was the only one of us who did not have frozen toes, frozen feet in Bergen-Belsen, because we did not have shoes, we only had wooden clogs. And he blessed Willow every day.
Back in Porlitz, were there any religious observances being held at all? Did your father maintain any kind of observances? He
prayed, he said his prayers, but other than that there were none. Because we were not a large group. I don't remember exactly how many families there were, but there were no formal religious observances.
And could you describe the day you left Porlitz? What was that like?
We were again told to get into one of those cattle cars, and we traveled from Porlitz to Bergen-Belsen, which is a considerable distance. When we arrived there, we saw prisoners in striped uniforms in very run-down condition. But we were in an enclosure where we were allowed to keep our civilian clothing, whatever we had. we did not have nearly enough for the winter because we left home in summer. But we wore our civilian clothing, and we did not have to do any work that I recall other than maintenance of the camp. And every morning we were supposed to stand at roll call, and the sanitary facilities were very primitive. We could only wash outdoors at a pump, and of course it was winter, so it was very difficult from that standpoint. Also, we were given very meager rations. We were starving, actually.
Was your family able to stay together?
Yes, we were together. We remained together, and this was very significant because people who were completely alone were much more vulnerable from a psychological standpoint. They were also very vulnerable from the simple reason that their food may have been stolen. And there were many cases where this happened, because when people starve, it's just very difficult to undergo that. Starvation, constant starvation, is a very dehumanizing thing. I remember one time when, after we were given bowls of soup, and one of the people died right in the middle of eating that bowl of soup, and the others, instead of trying to help, which they couldn't have anyway, they were sort of fighting over who would get the leftover soup.
What kind of contact did you have with the other prisoners in Bergen-Belsen?
Within that compound, we had relatively easy contact with others. And I remember, again, that we had a support group. Essentially, my sisters and myself, we were, again, around 5 or 6. And we concentrated on being on the lookout for people who gave up. And you could tell that, because if you were used to seeing a person with a relative who made all the effort to do the normal grooming, like shaving every day, and then you noticed that they stopped doing that, that was a clear sign that they have given up. And and then we tried speaking with those people and trying to analyze their problems. Like there were some people who were so addicted to smoking that they sold their bread for cigarettes. And of course, if in that case they were going to die surely. Or others where their problem was that their bread was stolen because they were alone and they couldn't take it with them and they had to go out on roll call. So we somehow organized, yes, and also we were given a piece of bread for 4 or 5 days, and some people just did not have enough willpower to cut a slice every day. They ate the whole 4 or 5 days ration at one time. Well, surely here they were also facing a grave problem, and we were trying to help in those ways.
You mentioned that there was relatively free access within that compound. What kind of people were in that compound with you? Where were they from?
Mainly from Hungary. There may have been some gypsies. I'm not entirely sure on that. And we were in plain barracks, and the tired bunk beds, in other words, there were two tiers to it, and we had just not mattresses, but some sacks with straw and maybe one blanket. And of course, because of the crowding, that we had to sleep to a bunk bed. Well, that helped us with the conserve the heat. And we were in the family. We could cover up with the same blanket, or maybe two of us. We had two blankets to cover up with. And we saw daily the people in the striped uniforms going by with certain ones had patches of a triangle of different colors. We didn't know what that meant. Next to us there was a compound where there were Jews from Holland. We weren't allowed to have contact with them or go too close to the barbed wire fence. And there was, of course, guards from the watchtower who were observing what went on. And we were given very poor rations. At one time, one young man who was working in the kitchen detail stole a potato, and he was shot dead. And his body was left on a pile of potatoes so that others would see what happens to someone who dares take any type of food.
Did you witness that?
Yes, we saw the body. I did not witness the shooting, but we saw the body because it was left there for at least 2 days.
Were you or any member of your family ever disciplined in the camps?
Not in the camps. I remember one occasion in Porlitz where a higher-up, somebody, as I remember, he was in civilian clothes, but he must have been a party member, a Nazi. And he came to see how things are. And then we had to stand at attention. And my father had a little stool that he fashioned himself out of some boards that he found, because it was difficult for him to stoop in the fields to pull up carrots or things. And so he had this little footstool. And this man became outraged at his trying to seek such luxury. How dare he? And he slapped his face. And of course nobody reacted, we wouldn't dare. But after this incident, the regular supervisor became much more lenient. It seemed that he was ashamed for that other man's action. Because, as I said, my father, even in those conditions, was somehow, even his appearance was such that it elicited respect.
Did you ever get sick?
Toward the end, in spring of 1945, there was a terrible epidemic of typhus in the camp, and typhus is connected with body lice, and of course we did not have the sanitary conditions, and in crowding, this illness occurs. And all of us in the family became ill, but that happened already in Theresienstadt. We were evacuated from Bergen-Belsen in April of 1945, just about 2 or 3 days before the British arrived in that area. We were forced marched to Celle, which is not too terribly far from Bergen-Belsen. I don't know exactly what the distance is. And at Celle we were told to embark into cattle cars again. And then the journey started toward Theresienstadt, which is a very considerable distance. And on the way we were attacked from the air by Allied bombers who of course had no way of knowing who the people are in those cars, but anything that moved on the rails was attacked from the air. And our transport had some tanks attached to it, which were not camouflaged. And the guards were German soldiers were guarding us. And quite a number of people were killed in those aerial attacks. And we arrived in Theresienstadt. I don't remember the exact date, but approximately 2 days later, the Russians arrived in Theresienstadt. At the time when we reached Theresienstadt, I was having very high fever. I was ill of typhus, and I was having hallucinations and delusions from the fever. So I was taken to the hospital. And I remember that my hair was shorn, and I was put into a very large ward, and I looked around, and they seemed to be men, and I told the Russians sanitars, the people who were taking care of us, I told them that I'm a woman and I would like to be among women, and they said, for us it makes no difference, women or men, it's all the same, makes no difference. And when I recovered, I left the hospital, and we and our family, those who survived, we left Theresienstadt and intended to go to Hungary.
Before we get to that, can we just go back a little and talk about the march out of Bergen-Belsen? Could you describe that a little more? I mean, how many people were with you? Who, you know, how long was the march? Who were the guards? Those kinds of things.
Well, essentially, all the people who were in that camp, in that compound that we were in. But I don't have a clear recollection of that march.
Do you remember how long it was at all?
Half a day at least.
We'll continue on the next tape. '97, interview with Milka Nakar, tape number 3. We were talking about your being evacuated from Bergen-Belsen in April and then being transported to Theresienstadt. About how long was that trip from Celle to Theresienstadt? Do you recall at all?
I believe it may have been around 2 days, but I'm not too sure on that count either.
And you mentioned being bombed while you were on the cars.
Yes.
What happened?
Actually, by attacks by machine gun. There were wave after wave of bombers flying overhead, and they allowed us to run out of the car. We were standing on an earthen dam or elevation, and the people ran down at either side of this elevation into the fields, and we threw ourselves on the ground, and when the wave passed over and we got up to continue running, there were some people who didn't get up because they were hit.
Did you think of escaping at that time?
No, there were German guards, and it was a territory that we didn't know. And I guess we were, by nature, we were the type of people who did not question authority. People who would try to escape would be people who were alone, but not people with the family. We were together, and we just had no way of escaping.
So what happened after the wave of shooting stopped?
Then we continued on and arrived in Theresienstadt. And as I said at the time, I was already ill. Therefore, I have no recollection of what happened at the time of the transition. I was told that the German guards escaped and the Russians came in. And when I recovered, we left Theresienstadt on the same day. And in the family it was decided that even at the beginning of the deportation, that we would try to contact one another, those who survived, through Hungary. We believed, mistakenly as it turned out, but we believed that the aunt and uncle in Budapest would remain there, and we thought we could make contact with the rest of the family through them. So our family were on the way to Hungary, and my younger sister, Gabriela, became ill, and she was taken from the train in Brno, which is presently Slovakia, I believe, and she was taken to the hospital, and I remained with her. And since I was very weak and I had just recovered from typhus, I sat next to her bed and fell asleep, and when I woke up, she had passed away. And she was buried in Brno. However, all my efforts in the later years to discover where she is buried were to no avail. Of course, Czechoslovakia was behind the Iron Curtain, but even in the recent years, when it was already possible to make contact, I had written to someone from the Jewish community in Brno, and I did not receive a reply. Then I contacted somebody else who made efforts through the city hall and tried to discover where she is buried, but she could not. She could not find it, the grave.
So what did you do after your sister died?
I went to Hungary, to Budapest, and there I met the other sister, Esther. She was in Hungary during the war. Actually, not the whole time, but she went in 1944. She went to Budapest to be with the aunt and uncle. And I met Esther and heard from her that she met her husband during the war. Her husband was in the Zionist underground, and he helped her survive because he provided papers for her. And they got married, and at this point they had a 2-month-old baby. And from Hungary, I went back to Theresienstadt to look for the other sister, for Deborah.
Can we just clarify something?
Yes.
When you left Theresienstadt initially, yes, after you got out of the hospital,
yes,
who was with you?
The parents were there, and my youngest sister and the cousins. And as I stated, my youngest sister, Gabriela, became ill and was taken from the train in Brno. So I remained with her, and the others continued on.
And when you went to Budapest, did you find your parents there as
Yes,
well
I
as
did.
your sister?
Yes, I did. Yes. But after a short while, I left Budapest. I left Hungary, and I intended going back to Theresienstadt to look for my older sister, because I was hoping that she was alive, but thought that she may need help. And when I arrived in Theresienstadt, I found out that she had passed away on the 25th or 27th of April. And then I intended going on to look for my oldest brother. And I received a message from his wife that she received a message that he had passed away also in Mauthausen. And on the way, traveling in those broken down conditions in the immediate post-war Europe, the transportation was extremely difficult. There were not enough trains, and we were also at a great risk from many Russian soldiers who were robbing and raping. They were even doing this to concentration camp survivors. And at one time, I was sitting in the train, and two Russian soldiers burst in with drawn guns, drawn pistols, and they yelled, "Chassi, the деньги," that means wristwatches and money. And next to me, there was a young man sitting who had a fairly large suitcase. And he told the Russian soldier that he is a Russian from Byelorussia, from White Russia, and that he was in prisoners of war camp, and he's on his way. He wants to get back home to Russia. And the Russian soldier answered, "We did not have any prisoners of war, we only had traitors," and shot him outright, put the revolver to the temple and shot him on the spot. And then, of course, I was not going to argue with him about my little suitcase. And then I decided that perhaps for the remaining part of the journey, perhaps I will be safer if I traveled on top of the roof, because not enough trains being available, people traveled on top of the roof, and we were hanging like grapes. And when the train went through a tunnel, we had to flatten down. And I was sitting on close to the edge of one of those trains, and the Russian soldiers, many of them were very nimble, very agile. One jumped from the roof of the other car to the roof of the car where I was sitting, and he sat down next to me and put his arm around me and asked me my name and so on. And I have to explain at this point what I looked like. I had no hair. I had a kerchief on my head, and I had a swollen abdomen from the effects of starvation. And he sat down next to me and started talking and hugging me, and it was obvious what his intention was. I did not notice, but I was told by others. Since I was at the time of the Russian takeover, I was ill, so I did not know what went on. So I told myself, here it goes. It's too bad. I have survived so far, but I have promised myself, if it came to rape, I was going to try to take my life. And I started inching toward the edge of the car, of the roof, and there was a young Jewish man sitting who was extremely clever, and he knew what the Russians were like, at least the ones who were doing these things. And he knew that no entreaty for mercy or anything would stop them. The only single thing that they were afraid of was venereal disease. So he moved over to this Russian soldier and said to him, "Comrade, I don't know this girl, but I just happen to know that she is sick of venereal disease. and the Russian soldier was gone as though shot out from a cannon. And my first impulse was that, first impression was that I was terribly insulted and I wanted to slap the face of this young man, and in the next second I realized that he had saved my life. And then I went back to Hungary, and for a while my parents and I, at this point I was the only one left with them, and they were quite broken and ill health. And we went from Budapest to a small community. It's called Bonyhad, and it was my father's birthplace. Shall I spell it? Or?
No, that's okay. We have it on the form.
Okay. And we were in Bonyhad until the spring of 1946. At that point, we left Hungary and went back to Austria to a displaced persons camp because we were determined not to remain in Europe.
Before we get into that, did you ever think of going back to Subotica in those years after the war?
No.
Immediately after the war?
No, I didn't, because we knew it was behind the Iron Curtain, and we wanted to go to Israel, Palestine at that time. And there was an incident where I was almost forcibly deported to Subotica, to Yugoslavia. And I talked my way out of it in a very unusual way.
How did that happen?
I was on my way to visit my sister, Esther, who at that point had a baby, a 2-month-old baby. And I bought a little baby outfit, and she lived in Buda. Buda and Pest are divided by the Danube, and there are several bridges connecting Buda and Pest. And the Russians set up checkpoints at the entrance to the bridge, and everybody they checked everybody's documents. Sorry, all the people who had no valid documents for remaining in Hungary were told to step aside and were to be taken to the police station. And I only had a transit document. So I was also told to stand with the group. And I was thinking, well, if they'll deport me to Yugoslavia, and my parents are here and they need me, and how can I get out of this? And then, excuse me, I had a sudden brainstorm. I went up to the Russian soldier and told him I had a 2-month-old baby whom I locked inside, and I just went out to buy a little outfit for him. And if I don't get back, he's going to die because there is no one to take care of him. And he let me go. And here again, I described before what I looked like. I had a swollen abdomen from the effects of the starvation and so on. Sorry, can I?
Go ahead. You said that you went from Hungary to a DP camp in Austria?
Yes.
Could you describe the DP camp?
It was called Riedenburg, and it was next to Salzburg. And we were required to do some work. We were also given the opportunity to learn. I myself enrolled in an ORT school, which was a vocational school. And I also worked in the office of the Joint Distribution Committee. And we were not we were not restricted to that camp. I remember going to theaters and so on, getting around in Salzburg. And in 1948, I met my future husband, and we were married in May 1948. And then I moved to Bregenz, which is close to the Swiss border. And my parents also came with us, and they had a small apartment in Hohenems, close to Bregenz. And
how did you meet your husband? Was he in the camp as well?
No, through acquaintances.
And what was his name?
His name was May, M-A-Y. And we were living in Bregenz from 1948 till 1950. During that time, we registered to go to Israel. But then we also heard that it was possible to register to go to the United States, and that the registration would close in about a month. So we assumed that it might take a few years until our turn comes to either go to Israel or go to United States. So we just registered to be on the safe side. And we were very surprised when after a few months we were notified that our turn has arrived, because Bregenz was in the French zone. And there were comparatively fewer survivors, displaced people in the French zone than there were in the either American or the English zone. Austria as well as Germany were divided into zones. So in December 1950, we arrived in the United States in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we did not know anyone. We were just simply sent there by the Jewish Family Welfare Service, Jewish Family and Children's Welfare Service. And we were given an apartment with all the basic necessities, and I just remember that it was terribly cold, and not knowing anyone, I felt very cold, both physically and spiritually.
Did you have any children at that time?
Yes, my oldest son was 18 months old at that time.
And what was your adjustment like to life in Minneapolis?
My husband, Mr. May, was looking for work, and he was given some work as a file clerk, and not file clerk, but in doing inventory and this kind of thing. And of course, I was at home taking care of Ellie, who was a baby then, and I couldn't enroll in any formal course to study English, so I carried a dictionary with me, and I habitually went into a supermarket with the baby in his stroller, and I would be taking the cans and boxes from the shelf and looking up the words in the dictionary. And this is how I learned English, and I mastered it relatively soon. Then later on, my husband was laid off, and while he was looking for a job, I started working as a nurse aide in the Mount Sinai Hospital in Minneapolis. And since I always had an inclination for medical work, I thought this was something that appealed to me. And later on, I applied for a one-year course as a practical nursing course, which was given through the University of Minnesota. And I worked for a while as a practical nurse. And then in '62, I decided to to try to advance. And I enrolled in a diploma course which was at the St. Barnabas Hospital in Minneapolis, and the academic subjects were at the McAllister College in St. Paul. And I finished that course, but during that time I had serious setbacks. I had a very latent mastoid infection which came to the surface and necessitated bilateral radical mastoidectomy, which left me with much less hearing, but it was necessary in order to save my life.
What about your parents? Did they immigrate?
My mother died 2 weeks before Ellie was born. She died of a stroke, a cerebrovascular accident. At age 61, she died. And then my father was helped by the Red Cross to go to Israel. And at that time, my older sister, the married sister, was in Israel, and also my other sister, Esther. So he went to Israel. Can I?
When you came to America and while you were living there, were people curious about your background and your experiences? Did they ask you questions?
Oh, yes. Yes, they did. But at that time, it was very difficult for me to speak about those experiences. It was really difficult to speak about it for approximately 20 years. It was just very gradual that I could open up and speak about it. But at this stage, I really feel with the deniers of the Holocaust and the survivors' numbers getting fewer and fewer every year, I really feel that I did want to have this documented, and this is why I asked for the interview and for my grandchildren's sake mainly.
You live in Israel now. How did you leave the United States for Israel?
I was divorced in 1972 from Mr. May, and my sons were in college then. And I felt I wanted to try to build my life anew. And so I went to Israel. And as I said, I do have a relatively large family there because my oldest sister and her husband had 6 children. And they had 4 at the beginning of the war. One little girl died in Bergen-Belsen of pneumonia, and after the war, my sister and her husband were reunited, and they had additional 3 children. So at present, those 6 siblings are all married and all have large families. They are religious, and they are the religious part of the family.
You were brought up religious. What about your faith?
Well, this was an emotional process which came very gradually with the Holocaust experiences, and culminated in the Yom Kippur War, which I happened to arrive in Israel just 2 months before the Yom Kippur War. And this process led to a change in my thinking and feeling. And This is the way. This is the only way I can explain it.
You mentioned that when you went to Israel, your sons were in college.
Yes.
You had only mentioned one son before.
Yes. My second son is living in Minneapolis. He's not married, and he is studying at the present for master's in computer science. He's about a semester away from it. He has a master's degree in mathematics, and he's also gifted musician and a very very multifaceted person.
And where was he born?
He was born in the United States, in Minneapolis.
And when you went to Israel in the
Yes.
70s, what kind of an adjustment did you have to make to life there?
Actually, it came very easily to me because I have relatives there, and I also had sort of a talent for picking up new languages. So I was in an ulpan. It's called an ulpan. It's a period of 5 or 6 months for studying Hebrew, and after that I found a job with relative ease, working as a professional nurse at the Rambam Hospital. And after...
We'll continue on the next tape.
Okay.
In 1997, interview with Milka Nakar, tape number 4. We were talking about your life in Israel, and you're working as a nurse in the hospital. And your second husband, did you meet him in Israel?
Yes, I did.
And could you tell us a little about him?
We met through acquaintances, and we were married in March 74 and lived in Haifa, and we were quite comfortable. We were going to lectures, theater, concerts, and this was very much the part of our life, and he liked doing those things. And he was injured in the War of Liberation, of Israel's War of Liberation. And at the time when we met, he was working as an accountant. And he retired in 1986, and we moved to a larger apartment in order to have room for our respective hobbies. But in 1987 March, he had a heart attack and he died.
And what did... You were going to say something, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that it was very short. We were married for 13 years. And I am alone. I have a sister and a brother living in Israel, plus nieces and nephews. So we have a large family there. And Ellie and Marlene came to Israel in 1979 and stayed, I believe, until 89. But then at that point they decided to come back to the States. And since that time I have been coming every year to visit them. And I also took a few trips, very interesting ones. And I'm very active. I'm retired, but I'm very, very active.
Through all the camps you went through, what sustained you during that period? What kept you going?
Well, I believe most of us thought that we might be the last survivors and there should be witnesses to tell the story. So this is what kept us going. Also as I said, constant starvation is a very dehumanizing experience. So we very consciously try to counteract that, especially in Bergen-Belsen. We would meet a group of peers, approximately the same age group, and we would say, let's see if we can still talk about things that interested us before that, about literature, about music, about poetry, all those things, and we would talk about those things. We would try to discuss it, but we inevitably ended up at two topics, and that was food and death, because that is what was all around us.
And how did your experiences affect the way you lived your life and brought up your children?
Well, I think, and also the profession I choose, I felt that life is God-given and therefore sacred, and no one has the right to extinguish another's life, nor put him through the humiliating things, because I think the Nazis' crime was not only killing people, but also dehumanizing them, also humiliating them in so many ways. And so to me, it has strengthened my resolve to respect life and respect the individual's dignity and so on.
Is there a message that you would like to leave for your children and your grandchildren?
I think they have absorbed it, the way they live, the way Marlene and Ellie are, the kind of education they are giving the children, and the way my grandchildren are relating to others. I believe they have absorbed that message.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to add?
I think just the frightening thing of what happens in a government system that is based on totalitarian system, where they follow an individual and they do everything that they are told, whether it is legal, moral or not. I don't know what it is in the mentality of the German people, that they always need to have a leader, a Führer, and they go after him and they adore him and admire him and do everything that they are told. And this is a very dangerous thing for any country. So I believe I will never say to anyone, forget and forgive. On the contrary, do everything that it is never forgotten.
Thank you very much. Okay. Could you describe this picture?
This is a picture of our family from approximately 1936 or 7. The top row is the sister Dora, who did not survive. In the middle is Yitzhak, who is living, thankfully, in Tel Aviv. And the right-hand side is Esther, who is living also in Israel, in a kibbutz. In the middle are our parents, father, and to the right of him, mother. And the bottom row on the left-hand side is myself, and next to me, my younger sister, Gabriela.
Could you just state your parents' names and where this picture was taken?
My father's name was Simon, mother's name was Eve or Haba, and the picture was taken in the garden next to our house in Subotica.
Yeah, I'm sorry. In this picture?
This picture was taken in Subotica approximately in 1937. To the left of the young couple are two aunts, and one is the mother of my sister's husband, of the mother of the groom. My sister Nettie and her husband Yitzhak. To the right of Yitzhak is my mother, Eve. The top row on the right is an uncle who is deceased. They were living in Budapest, Hungary. His name was Samuel Upman. To the left of him is my aunt, who was the adoptive mother of Esther, or rather they raised Esther, and her name was Ethel Renner. And next to her to the left is the uncle. His name was Adolf Renner. To the left, next to him, is my father.
And this picture?
This is a picture of my oldest brother. His name was Leopold. Unfortunately, he did not survive. He passed away in about a week after the war ended. The picture was taken in Subotica at home in approximately 1936, I believe.
And his full name?
His full name was Leopold Lippmann Pfeiffer.
And this picture?
This is a picture of my two older sisters. On the left side is Esther. Esther survived, and she's living in Israel, in Kibbutz Kfar HaChoresh. To the right of her is Dora, who unfortunately did not survive. She died approximately 2 weeks after the war ended in Theresienstadt of the results of the epidemic typhus.
And Esther's full name?
Esther's full name is Esther Spitz. Her maiden name is Pfeiffer. And Dora Pfeiffer.
And this picture?
This is a picture of approximately 1940 or 41 of my younger sister. Her name was Gabriella Pfeiffer. She unfortunately also perished in Brno of the effect of the epidemic typhus. She died in May 1945. Must have been a fence in the garden.
Okay. This picture?
This picture was taken in Subotica, apparently in our garden, sometime in the early 40s. The person on the extreme left in the picture is my youngest sister, Gabriella. The next one above her is a cousin. Her name is Kaf Pechi. The next, toward the right, is our mother, Eve Pfeiffer. Above her is another cousin. I goofed here because I don't see the... This is a picture that was taken in the garden of our home next to the fence in Subotica in the early 1940s. The person on the left-hand side is my youngest sister, Gabriella, who unfortunately did not survive. Next to her, toward the right, is Esther, my sister, who is living in Israel. Next to her is our mother, Eve Pfeiffer. Above her is a cousin. Her last name was Kaf. Her first name was Turkey. Next to her, toward the right, is another cousin, her sister, and her name is Leichi, Kaf. Next to her is my sister-in-law, the wife of my oldest brother, and her name is Helene Pfeiffer, a maiden name Fishman, maiden name Pinchover. So, this is a picture of my second brother Yitzhak. He sent it to us from Germany, where he was a prisoner of war. He was in the Yugoslavian army in 1941 and was taken prisoner of war. This was taken approximately in 1941, and at this point he was living in Germany, where the Jewish prisoners of war were separated from the others. And he wrote that his situation was relatively good. He was working as an interpreter.
And this picture?
This is a picture of myself. It was taken in next to Salzburg in Riedenburg, which was a displaced persons camp. It was taken approximately 1947.
And this picture, these pictures?
These pictures are of my parents after the war, approximately in 1947, I believe, and the picture on the left is my father, Simon Pfeiffer. To the right of him is my mother, Eve Ohaba Pfeiffer.
And this picture?
This is a picture of my first husband and my second son. My second son is on the left-hand side. His name is Saul or Shaul, and to the right of him is his father, my first husband, Mayer May, now deceased.
And when was this approximately?
This was approximately 10 years ago.
So about 1986 or 7?
1986 or 7, yes.
Could you introduce your family, please?
Gladly. This is my oldest son, Eli, or Eliezer, and to my left is Marlene, my daughter-in-law. Marlene's maiden name is Zuckman, and their 3 children, my 3 grandchildren. On the left-hand side is David, and in the middle is Yossi, who is 13 years old now. David, I forgot to say, he's 10. And Heli, or Rachel, to my right, will be 8 years old in July. My present trip to the United States, the occasion was Yossi's bar mitzvah. And he was bar mitzvah a week ago. And during the proceedings, during the ceremony in the synagogue, I felt that now we can truly say that we have defeated Hitler, that I have lived to see this day, and we have defeated him by having been able, after all that we went through, having been able to build a normal life for ourselves, to establish families. And thank God I also saw my grandchildren, and I was able to come and visit them and be present at the bar mitzvah, and I'm very, very happy and grateful for that.
Thank you very much.